When the world said, you can't, he wired together a future no one saw coming. I come from a place you wouldn't look twice at if you were passing through. A little spit of a town where the roads are more pothole than pavement, and the nights smell like diesel, dust, and regret. We had one grocery store, 2 bars, and a church that doubled as a community center whenever a storm rolled in and knocked the power out, which was often. Folks around here are used to doing without. Most never leave. Some don't want to. But me, I wasn't built for small. My name's Caleb Monroe. I grew up in a double wide at the edge of a soybean field, raised by a mama who worked the diner 6 days a week and a father I only knew through old photographs and silence. She never spoke about him and I never asked. Not really. You learn early on not to go poking old wounds around here. Still, I used to think I was going to be a mechanic like Uncle Roy. I'd hang around his garage after school, hand him wrenches, watch him curse at the guts of old Chevys like they owed him money. He told me once, "There ain't nothing in this world that don't break eventually." That stuck with me, but I remember the exact moment everything changed. I was 16, lying on my stomach in the dirt behind the gas station, listening to this busted old radio I'd rigged together with parts from a broken lawn mower and a VCR. That night, I picked up a signal from a talk show out in Phoenix. Some guy rambling on about clean energy and the future of solar grids. Most people would have clicked it off, but I listened, wide-eyed, heart thumping like I just discovered fire. Something clicked, like a wire finally sparking to life. The next morning, I told Mama I wanted to be an engineer. She just looked at me, not angry, not proud, just tired. "Boy," she said, "you ain't even passed algebra." Fair point. I was scraping D's in math and barely showing up half the time. But that didn't matter. The dream had already taken root. I became obsessed. Obsessed in the way only a broke kid with something to prove can be. I'd check out physics books from the library, most of which I couldn't pronounce. I started watching online lectures at the town's only Starbucks. Slow-loading videos, buffering forever. I didn't care. That's when the whispering started. "He thinks he's better than us. What, he gonna build a rocket out of rust? Dreamers don't make it far out here." Even Uncle Roy, who I thought had my back, pulled me aside one day and said, "There ain't no shame in working with your hands, Caleb. Don't get lost in the clouds." But I wasn't lost. I was just looking further than they were willing to. So yeah, they laughed. And I let them. Because deep down, I believed it, that my dream could change everything. I started bringing home junk. Microwaves, old radios, stuff people tossed out on the curb. Mama just sighed when she saw me dragging another busted appliance up the steps, muttering about how we already had enough broken things in this house. But I saw potential. In every wire, every coil, every fried motherboard, I saw puzzle pieces. I didn't know what the picture looked like yet, but I knew I was getting closer. I set up a lab in the shed out back, which was really just a spider-filled shack with a dirt floor and holes in the roof. I patched it up with old signs and trash bags. Didn't matter. To me, it was sacred ground. That's where I started building, tinkering, learning, failing. A lot of failing. I rewired an old box fan to spin on solar power using a calculator panel and some hot glue. It barely worked, but when those blades turned on sunlight alone, I damn near cried. No one else cared. At school, my grades were trash. Always had been. I wasn't stupid, I just didn't care about what they were teaching. I'd sit in algebra, thinking about current flow and energy efficiency instead of polynomials and test prep. My guidance counselor told me I should consider trade school. "There's nothing wrong with being an electrician," she said gently, like she was trying to land me softly. "But I don't want to fix things that already exist," I told her. "I want to make something new." She blinked at me, confused, like I just said I wanted to build a castle on Mars. I think that's when I realized I wasn't going to get help. Not from school. Not from town. Not even from most of the teachers. To them, I was just another lost cause with too many absences and no direction. But one person noticed. Mr. Benton. He taught science, drove a rusted-out Subaru, and always smelled like coffee and printer ink. He wasn't exactly warm, but he saw me. I guess he recognized something in the way I leaned forward during lessons, even if I never turned in homework. One day after class, he pulled me aside. "You ever heard of MIT?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, cautious. "Why?" He handed me a brochure, creased down the middle, like it had been in his desk for years. They run a program for kids like you. Smart, broke, hungry. You want in, you're gonna need to bust your ass. I stared at that brochure all night. Read it cover to cover. Didn't even understand half of it. But it felt like holding a map to someplace real. That was the spark. The moment when a dream turned into a plan. From that day on, I changed everything. I stopped skipping. I stayed late. I asked questions until teachers got annoyed. I watched Khan Academy until 2 a.m., scribbling notes on napkins and the backs of envelopes. I taught myself trigonometry from YouTube and circuits from some guy in India who taught engineering for free. I applied to that program with shaky hands and a personal essay that read more like a confession. And when the email came in 6 weeks later, I opened it on the floor of the diner while Mama was refilling ketchup bottles. I got in. Free summer program. Full scholarship. One shot. I looked up at her, eyes wide. She didn't say anything for a long second. Just held the paper. Read it twice. Then said, "So when do you leave?" Like it was inevitable. Like she'd been waiting on this moment, too. But the rest of town? Different story. The ridicule turned to something colder. Not just teasing anymore, resentment. "Oh, so he's too good for us now? He thinks he's gonna save the world with wires and duct tape. Let's see how long he lasts in a real place." It stung. I won't lie. But it didn't stop me. Nothing was gonna stop me. First time I ever left the state was on a Greyhound bus with a duffel bag, a spiral notebook, and a heart beating like a jackhammer. The program was in Boston. I'd never even flown before. Didn't fly now either, couldn't afford the ticket. That bus ride was long, smelled like gasoline and stale fries, but I didn't care. I was going somewhere. Somewhere that mattered. When I got to the city, everything felt fast. Big, loud. Like someone turned the volume up on life and forgot where the knob was. The campus was beautiful. Old brick buildings with copper domes, glass labs that looked like they came out of a sci-fi movie, and students who wore backpacks like they were bulletproof armor. Confident, fast-talking, already halfway to brilliant. And me? I felt like a farm kid who'd wandered into NASA. Everyone else was from prep schools, science academies, private tutors. They used words I didn't know, talked about their robotics teams, their internships. Meanwhile, I just figured out Ohm's law 2 months ago in a storage shed with a flashlight duct taped to the ceiling. First few days, I barely spoke. I'd sit in lecture halls, scribbling everything down like my life depended on it. I'd stay up late rewatching recorded sessions, pausing every 5 seconds to look up words. One night, I had a breakdown in the stairwell of the dorm, convinced I wasn't cut out for it. That's when I met Ray. He found me sitting on the steps, head in my hands, breathing too fast. "You good, man?" he asked. I shrugged, just wondering how long before they realize I don't belong here. He laughed, but not in a mean way. "Dude, half the kids here feel like that. The other half are just faking it better." Ray was from Chicago. Sharp as hell, wore mismatched socks and carried a fidget cube everywhere. We clicked fast. He was the first person I told about the shed lab back home. He didn't laugh. He said, "That's badass." From that point on, something shifted. I stopped trying to blend in and started leaning into what made me different. My scrappy knowledge, my trial and error hacks, my backwoods ingenuity. And to my surprise, people respected it. Professors would ask, "You built that from what?" Other students started coming to me for ideas. One project, I built a prototype for a low-cost solar filtration system using old PVC pipe and graphite powder. Designed for rural areas with limited infrastructure. When I gave my presentation, the room got quiet in that rare, electric way, like they were actually listening. Afterward, one of the instructors pulled me aside and said, "This could be real, not just a school thing. You could scale this." Those words stuck to me like glue. Still, I didn't forget where I came from. While others were talking about startups and Silicon Valley, I was thinking about home. About the folks drinking warm beer on sagging porches. About Mama wiping down counters until her knuckles cracked. About the kids who'd never heard someone say the word potential without a sneer. I didn't want out of my hometown just for me. I wanted out so I could reach back and pull something better in. So, when the summer ended and they asked who wanted to stay on for research opportunities, I raised my hand. Even though I didn't know where I'd sleep or how I'd pay for meals. Even though I missed home like hell. I stayed. Because the dream wasn't done yet. I didn't have a dorm that fall. Technically, I wasn't even a student yet, just a summer program alum with a research assistant slot and a dream that still didn't pay the bills. But I made it work. I couch surfed, Slept on air mattresses in other interns' apartments. Ate more instant noodles than should be legal. Took side gigs fixing laptops and rewiring coffee makers just to scrape by. I call Mama twice a week. Lie and tell her I was doing fine, eating good, sleeping good, living good. She'd say, "I know you're lying, Caleb." But she never pushed, just reminded me to keep going. Keep pushing. The lab I worked in was run by Dr. Havelock, a sharp-eyed woman who spoke 3 languages and never wasted a single word. She scared the hell out of me at first. But she was brilliant, focused, fierce. She was working on low-cost, sustainable infrastructure solutions for underdeveloped regions, water purification, renewable microgrids, that sort of thing. When I pitched her my solar filtration hybrid idea, based on the prototype I'd made in my shed, she leaned back in her chair, stared at me for a long second, then said, "Build it. Better this time." That was all the permission I needed. Ray joined the project too. We spent nights soldering in silence, or arguing over circuit diagrams until the sun came up. I'd never felt that kind of hunger before. Not just to create, but to get it right. I dug into the math, the science, the logistics, learned what I didn't know. And when that wasn't enough, I found people who did know. I asked questions without shame. Pride was useless here. We built a prototype, then another, and another. And finally, we had something. A small, solar-powered unit that could purify water and generate enough electricity to power a small home. Cheap to build, easy to transport, perfect for areas with no grid access. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was real. We presented it at a student innovation conference. Halfway through the demo, the screen froze and the battery glitched. People started shifting in their seats, whispering. I felt that old fear creep up. Small-town Caleb, the imposter, the fraud. But I stepped forward, hands shaking, and said, "Okay, so that part failed. Let me show you what didn't fail." And I did. Showed them the guts, the thinking, the reason behind every connection and panel and filter. Spoke from the gut, not the script. When I finished, people clapped. Not out of pity because they got it, because it meant something. Afterward, a tall guy in a wrinkled blazer approached me. Said he was with a nonprofit that builds tech for crisis zones. Asked if I'd ever thought about taking the project global. That night, I sat on a borrowed mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying that question over and over. What if this thing actually changes lives? A month later, I flew home for the first time in nearly a year. Mama met me at the bus station, eyes full and arms tight. The town hadn't changed a bit. Same peeling signs, same cracked sidewalks. But I gave a talk at the high school. Not because I was anyone important yet, but because Mr. Benton asked me to. Standing in front of those kids, some half asleep, some smirking, I told them the truth. I came from the same dirt roads as you. I failed more classes than I passed. I ate ramen for breakfast. I wanted to quit 100 times. But I didn't, because I knew what I was building mattered. One kid, skinny, shy, eyes full of something I recognized, stayed after to ask questions. Same ones I used to ask. That's when I knew it was working. Even if nothing else came from it, it was already doing what I dreamed. But that was just the beginning. Next step? Turn the prototype into a product. Get funding. Build a team. Scale. That's when the real pressure started. Because chasing a dream is one thing, but trying to deliver on it, that's a whole other kind of storm. Funding. That was the next mountain, and I had no map. Ideas don't mean much without money. And I didn't come from wealth or connections or anyone who could write a check with more than 2 zeros. So I had to learn the game. Fast. I started pitching anywhere and everywhere. University showcases, online startup competitions, nonprofit accelerators. Half the time I felt like I was making it up as I went along, wearing borrowed blazers and talking about projections and scalability, like I wasn't still living off bagels and coffee. The rejections stacked up fast. Too ambitious. Needs more development. Great concept, but where's the business model? And my personal favorite, have you considered partnering with someone more seasoned? Seasoned. They meant older, whiter.
Millionaire résumé.
Smoother accent. Someone who looked like they belonged in those sleek boardrooms with catered lunches and panoramic views. But I kept pitching, because every no just sharpened the blade. Then came one pitch event in DC, invitation only, sponsored by a clean tech fund. Ray and I scraped together bus fare and shared a motel room with roaches and broken blinds. We rehearsed in the lobby until 3 a.m. When we finally got up there, my hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the podium. But this time, I told the whole story. The shed, the dirt floor, the radio signal that changed my life. I told them about Mama, the power outages, the people back home boiling water because they couldn't trust the tap. I showed them the prototype and said, "This isn't about profits. It's about dignity. It's about giving people the tools to build their own future." Silence. Then applause. Real, thunderous applause. We didn't win the top prize, but 2 weeks later, I got an email from a woman named Isla Ramirez. She ran a social impact investment group out of New York. Said she believed in what we were doing. Offered seed funding, mentorship, and a chance to build it for real. Ray tackled me in the library when I told him. We probably got banned for life, but it was worth it. That was the spark that lit the fire. We formed a company. Small at first, just me, Ray, and 2 other students who believed in the mission. We worked out of a tiny co-working space above a pizza shop. Laptops overheating, cables everywhere, window AC groaning like it was dying. But we were alive. We started designing a scalable version of the system. Cheap to build, easy to ship, low maintenance. We called it Lumenbox. First deployment was in a rural village in South Carolina hit hard by a hurricane. Grid was still down. Water was dirty. We set up 3 Lumenboxes. Within 48 hours, families had clean water and enough electricity to charge devices, run lights, keep medicine cold. One man, grizzled, sunburned, quiet, looked at me and said, "This thing's a miracle, son." I told him it wasn't. It was just wires and light. But what I wanted to say was, "No, sir. It's a dream with teeth. But success brings eyes. And not all eyes are kind." A larger company, one with millions in backing and ties to government contracts, started sniffing around. They offered to partner, which was code for absorb and rebrand. When I said no, their tone shifted. Lawyers got involved. Claims of patent overlap, accusations of tech infringement. Couldn't believe it. These people hadn't invented anything, they just wanted to steal the story. For a week, I thought we were done. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I walked around our office like a ghost. Then Mama called. She said, "Boy, when a dog barks at a lion, it ain't because it thinks it can win. It's 'cause it's scared." And I laughed. For the first time in days. We hired a pro bono legal team, volunteers from the same nonprofit that sponsored US in Boston. Turns out we were cleaner than fresh snow. Everything was ours. Ours and built from dirt. We didn't just survive that fight. We came out with more press than ever before. They tried to bury us. Didn't know we were seeds. So yeah, it got messy. It got real. But we weren't backing down. Not when the world was still out there. Waiting. Needing. The first time I stood on a stage with the UN logo behind me, I couldn't stop sweating. Not from fear, though yeah, I was nervous, but from this heavy, weird mix of disbelief and clarity. Like part of me still couldn't believe I was there, and the other part had always known I would be. The woman introducing me called me a visionary innovator from humble beginnings. Humble, sure. More like forgotten. But I didn't flinch. Because I knew what I was about to say mattered. I walked up to the mic, looked out at a sea of suits, cameras, policymakers, CEOs, and changemakers. All waiting. And I told them the truth. I told them about the shed. The static-filled radio. The cracked sidewalks and cracked knuckles. The power of being underestimated. The brilliance born out of necessity. Then I told them about Lumenbox. About how, with less than $1 million in funding, we'd brought clean water and energy to 6 countries, 19 rural towns, for refugee camps, and 1 school district back home where the pipes had turned brown and no one in the state seemed to care. I told them it wasn't charity, it was empowerment. Because people don't want to be saved. They want to be seen. Given tools. Given light. The applause after? Deafening. I don't even remember walking off the stage. Just the way my legs shook when I sat down again. That speech went viral. I became, somehow, the face of grassroots innovation. Tech magazines, podcast interviews, a segment on 60 Minutes. Mama taped every one of them on the old DVR and cried every time, even the ones I told her not to watch because they edited my words weird. Colleges started inviting me to speak. Startups offered buyouts. One guy from Silicon Valley tried to offer me $10 million on the spot in exchange for controlling rights to Lumenbox. I told him I didn't build this thing to make rich people richer. I built it because I know what it feels like to boil water over a propane stove and pray the power doesn't cut out again. We didn't sell. Instead, we expanded. Hired folks from towns like mine. Built training programs. Partnered with disaster relief organizations. Set up solar grids in places the world forgot. Then came the call that changed everything. NASA. They were designing modular energy pods for deep space missions. Wanted to adapt Lumenbox tech for off-world environments. Asked if I'd be interested in leading a joint research team. My jaw literally dropped. Ray screamed. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. A dream that started in a tin roof shed? Going to space? Come on. I went back home one more time before the NASA project started. Mama was out on the porch. Same swing. Same chipped coffee mug. She looked me up and down and said, "You remember when I told you to stop bringing home trash?" "Yeah." I smiled. Good thing I didn't listen. The town was still small. Still struggling. But now it had streetlights powered by solar. A new library wing, built with grant money I helped raise. And a STEM club at the high school with more members than the football team. That's the part no one tells you. Changing the world? Starts small. Painfully small. It's not a single switch you flip. It's a million stubborn sparks in the dark. Now, whenever someone asks me how I made it, how a broke kid from nowhere ended up at NASA, I give them the same answer. I didn't chase money. I chased meaning. I followed a signal that no one else heard. And I never stopped listening.